Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your story as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us. And tonight we have Gino, and he found out about us through Male Survivor website, which is an amazing resource. And how long have you been on that resource, Gino?
Since 2001.
Wow, that's a long time. Yeah, it's a pretty incredible website for male survivors and for their family members. And also just if you're wondering what it's like. It's for people to post anonymously. I don't know if you post anonymously, Gino, or yeah. And I think it's great because you can tell your story and you could also see other members' stories. And it's a community of men who are just trying to help each other out.
What I loved about your testimony was when you said you didn't know until you found that website, and it kind of showed you that, oh my gosh, there's help. There's other people that have gone through this. And our biggest thing is telling your story, because when we tell our story, then other people know they're not alone. And I think that's what's really powerful. And I always say this, I think I probably say it every week. There's a statistic that it takes about 26 years for somebody to share that childhood abuse.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
It took me about 20 years.
Yeah. So why don't you jump in, tell us your story? And
Okay. I was the middle of 3 boys. When I was 5, my mother died. My little brother was 2. So we were really young. And she died of natural causes. She had, it's like scarlet fever when she was a baby. And she had the holes in the heart and stuff. And, it was unknown until after she had my little brother, and she started going downhill. So she passed. And with that, my father went crazy. He was, a drinker and all that. And he was drinking anyway, but that just sent him over the edge. And then my grandparents moved in to take care of us. And, they did the best they could. But we had to spend a lot of time with my aunt in town at her house to give my grandparents, a break. They weren't in for raising kids again. So now my aunt and her family, they were only 2 blocks away. We were very, very close with them. But her husband was a drunk, a drunk's drunk, as I say. So we would stay there a lot, and there was a lot of dysfunction there. Then my father remarried. He remarried within a year, and we had a new mom, which was great. Yeah,
Yeah.
What did I know? And then within 18 months, that was over.
Wow.
Yeah, so we lost another mom. So talk about, attachment issues.
And trauma. Seriously.
Yeah.
For such
there was fights. The cops would come to the house once in a blue moon. There was a lot of drama. My father's drinking was the cause of it all, and him staying away. And then, so she left. I can't blame her. Then we ended up staying a lot at my aunt's house in town again, because then I think there was a gap between somebody staying with us. Like my grandparents, when my father got married again for the second time, they moved back home. And then when my stepmother left, I think there was a lull between somebody coming. So we ended up spending a lot of time at my aunt's house. And then my uncle, her husband, the drunk, he started paying a lot of attention to me. He would, sit me on his lap, and, we'd watch TV and stuff. And it was just a lot of attention. And, I didn't know. I was a needy little kid. I was, I was 7 years old, 8 years old. And it just went on like that for a little while. And then one day, that family went to take my cousin to the airport. And somehow I was left alone with this uncle at their house. And that's when it happened the first time. I mean, I was, he called to me. He was in the bathroom. He called to me. So I went there, and there he's, and basically raped me. And, I was in shock. I mean, I was like, what is this, And I knew nothing about sex. I was 8 years old, in the mid 70s, nobody.
He's your adult. He's the person that's supposed to be looking out for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. The guy's like 40 something years old. He's, he's definitely old enough to know better.
Yeah.
And I remember, walking home afterwards. I mean, I left the house right after, and I was dazed and confused. But I immediately knew that this was really bad and wrong. I mean, no one had to tell me. It was just instinct, and I had a reason walking home in my 8-year-old little mind, and through my tears, I can't tell anybody. I couldn't tell. If my father found out, he would have. I know he would have killed him and murdered him. And then where would we be? With nobody. And then my aunt, she, I knew that she would throw me to the wolves sooner than destroying her own family. As messed up as it was, I mean, it was all about her and them. Yeah. So I figured, well, I'll just have to keep this a secret and just somehow stay away from him. We had to spend a lot of weekends over there, sleep over. And he worked in a restaurant, and he would come home at midnight. And, we'd be sleeping, and I'd be awoken by him molesting me. While I'm sleeping with my little brother and my cousin, who's my age, sleeping right next to me or up in the bed. And then I realized I got to try to hide myself when we sleep over there. And, my cousin and my little brother was sleeping like a pull-out sofa in the rec room. I would barricade myself underneath it with all the pillows from the sofa. Oh. And again, I'd be woken up in the middle of what seemed like the middle of the night, and with him doing his thing. So it didn't work, but I had to keep the secret at this point,
Right. Yeah. It just, that picture you paint of you being 8, walking down the road, trying to make some sense of something that makes no sense. And to know that nobody, number one, your dad would kill him. Number 2, your aunt would not believe you, or she would.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That you had you had to make that decision at that age. It's heartbreaking.
And it's a 2-block walk, so it's really short. I had to work through all this in my little mind.
Yeah. How long did that go on?
It went on from about 8 to 12. So it happened a lot, but that was bad enough. From 8 till about 11, I hated him. I was scared. I tried to hide from him, and then once I hit 11, I started going through puberty. And then it was me who went there looking for it, who became an accomplice. It was, it's really pathetic. Yeah. You got this little kid who's 11 years old, and now he's turned on by it and hypersexualized.
Yeah. But that's why it's so bad.
It was bad enough.
Right. That how can you even make any sense of that? Yeah.
Yeah, he basically groomed you to be his accomplice, like you said.
Yeah.
When we're that young and when we can't control what's stimulating us, when we don't understand it. And then when the stimulation happens, we want it again. You want it.
That's it was like a drug. I mean, I've never did drugs in my life because I could never, release that control. But it was like a drug, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The endorphins and all this stuff was all new, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it was like a high,
So how did that end for you? I mean, you said it was until you were about 12?
12, yeah. What happened was I started acting out with others, and I had this friend who wasn't really a friend. It was just somebody, my age, actually a few months older. But he all of a sudden said, one day when we were playing, hey, you want to go naked? We were 11 years old. And so, he just wanted to play like that. That was it. But, I had all kinds of sick, weird stuff in my mind. And it went right from 0 to 60 with whatever was happening to me. We did with him. I did with him.
You had background you were already taught the lessons.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you used that.
I mean, and he was a willing participant and wasn't, anything, but it's still, it should never have happened. Mm-hmm. I understand sometimes kids may play a little show and tell and everything's fine with that,
Yeah.
But what happened here should have never happened. And then it went on with him for years, like daily. So once I had that situation with this friend, what did I need this uncle for?
Oh.
So and what really triggered the separation was, like I said, my cousin, his son, we were like brothers, and we had the same friend group. We lived in the same town. We were in a lot of the same classes. So one day, two of our friends go to my cousin in front of me and complain that his father is putting his hands down their pants.
Oh, really?
And my cousin's trying to joke it away, like, oh, he's just goofing around. He's drunk and And I'm like, whoa. I knew it was happening because I could see it too, Yeah. But I was like, whoa, I got to get out of here. I can't let my secret come out if they spill the beans, because then it's going to. And yeah, he was just putting his hands down their pants. And yes, that's abuse and very bad. But I mean, what was happening to me was well beyond that. So I didn't want any of that to come out. So with that, I says, I got to just break away from all of it. And from my cousins, the rest of the family, I didn't speak to them. I still haven't.
Wow.
So I was 12 years old, and I broke away from that family that we were so close with. And nobody really asked, cared.
Wow.
My father was, in and out of relationships and living for himself, and we were like baggage. So, he didn't really care. He didn't really see.
So you've never really.
I made the break with that. And the thing is now those two boys never said nothing. Nothing ever came of that. They complained to my cousin, but I guess they didn't say anything to their parents, or their parents didn't want to say anything.
Yeah.
And then another friend, who ended up being my best friend, he told me he went after this happened. He went to my cousin's house looking for my cousin, like on a Saturday morning, and my uncle let him in, knowing no one was home. And then my uncle was pouring at him, trying to, molest him. He said that he got out of there. He was old enough to, I guess, 12 at this point. He realized that, he didn't want that. So he ran out. He told his mother, and his mother, I guess she didn't want to, make a thing, just pretend it didn't happen. So there's at least 3 others that I know of that were molested by him.
Wow.
Plus he was handsy with all the women in the family and whoever else came around him. It was just a bad scene all around, real dysfunction.
So
in our family, and then, that family.
After you're 12 and you basically cut off all contact with him, you really haven't had any contact? You haven't confronted him about it? You haven't?
After I started dealing with this, I hit the wall with the abuse issues in 1999, January 1999. I was trolling for porn and erotic stories online.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I find this male survivor's personal website and his story. I'm reading it looking to get off. And I'm reading his story, and I'm like, all these red flags start shooting off in my head. I'm like, whoa, he's telling my story. He's feeling the same things I'm feeling. He's hurt the same way I'm hurting. And all of a sudden, it just hit me that, my walls and everything else just crumbled. All the denials, the safe little denials that my little childhood brain cobbled together, right. It all just crumbled. And it's not like I ever forgot any of this. It's just that my brain was able to say it didn't mean anything. Yeah. It didn't change me. It didn't mean anything. It's just something weird that happened. I'm okay. Abuse would never say, I could never admit I was a victim or I was ever abused. It was just something weird that happened.
Yeah. Our brains are so amazing.
Yeah, we're able to compartmentalize and just put that, in a separate little box there that doesn't mean anything, even though it's affecting us in ways that we're not aware of, like you're talking about the hypersexuality and so forth.
Yeah.
We don't realize that's triggered by these things that happen to us. We just think that we ignore it, it'll stay there.
Right.
How old were you in 99 when you were?
I was like 31 in that area.
Okay. And so when this happened to you, what was your reaction?
I was bawling my eyes out. I could, it all came crystal clear. I could see everything. I can, all the things that I didn't want to see before. Now I see. It was in my face. I couldn't deny it anymore. And I could, all the shame, the toxic shame that, I was living with, which was terrible. I mean, that was really bad. I mean, from being a little kid with that.
Yeah.
My life I was living hiding in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
From being a little kid on, I didn't want any kind of attention on me because I felt that if anybody looked at me long enough, that they would see the shame on me or in me.
They'd know.
No.
Yeah, they would know. Yeah.
They'd know.
So I didn't like any kind of attention, good or bad. I just faded into the background like wallpaper.
Yeah.
And in school, I mean, I just crashed and burned in school. I hated being in school. I hated being in school after my mother died. My kindergarten teacher asked, "Hey, did anything happen this weekend?" I must have been gone for a week or so after my mother died. I don't remember, but I remember when I went back and she asked, "What happened? Anybody have any news or any stories about what's going on in their what's in their lives?" So I said, "Oh," I raised my little hand. I said, "Oh, my mother died," and she just looked at like a deer in the headlights, and this other boy across the class he yells, he goes, "You're such a liar," and everybody starts laughing. I mean, they're laughing at me, and with that, I just sunk down in my chair, and that's it. That was I just turned off, and then the abuse and everything else going on, all the rest of the chaos, I just turned off. I hated being in school because all the other kids mirrored back to me everything I wasn't and didn't have. So I just turned off. I didn't want to be there.
I know that feeling.
I dropped out of high school. I just didn't go.
So once this guy that you recognized that was talking about being abused and it struck you, what were your next steps? What did you do after that?
Well, I started searching online about abuse. And this was, again, 1999. I just had a little web TV box. I didn't have a computer or anything.
Yeah.
Just a little TV set, web TV box that you could play the internet through.
Yeah.
And so I ended up finding a woman's little kind of, abuse forum. And it was a kind of a mixed group, but there was like maybe me and one other guy,
Yeah.
But I ended up talking with her and then I found another male group that only lasted about a year or two, but that really opened my eyes, So I learned a lot from that. This was pre-Male Survive.
Okay, but it was a similar thing, just kind of a forum where other male survivors would reach out.
It was a peer discussion forum.
Yeah.
Other males.
But it was just online?
Just online, yeah.
Did you go to therapy or reach out to...
I went to a brick and mortar group therapy. And that was mixed. Again, mixed. I think I was the only male most of the time. There was a couple times where there was another male that would come around.
Wow,
that was good too.
It's really courageous, Gino. I went through. This was back in late '80s, early ¡90s, and there wasn't a lot of men talking about this ever.
Oh yeah, and I could never go and try to hunt down I'm out in a rural area now. I mean, I was from New York City, but I'm an hour away from New York City now.
Yeah.
So there's nothing out here.
Yeah.
Even if I found a therapist, I mean, I'm not going to spill my guts to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing or talking about. I could spill my guts anywhere. I don't need to pay somebody and then have them not be right anyway.
So what has changed for you since then?
Well, everything. The toxic shame was gone. I learned, first of all, that, it wasn't my fault. I heard that, and on a lot of levels, I understood it wasn't my fault. Yeah, he was an adult. I was a little kid, but it didn't sink really down deep into me until like about 2 years later. I met my nephew for the first time. He was 11.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
That was the age I switched and started going there. And I was, and when I met him, I was like, whoa, this is what 11 is.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I should have been.
Yeah.
The kid was, a nice kid. I mean, so young and innocent, everything I should have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's when it hit me. It sunk in that that should have never happened to me. It was not my fault.
Mm-hmm.
before that, I wasn't around any kids or, babies or kids at all. I just wasn't. So I didn't have that insight.
Right. Because we're adults, we sort of visualize ourselves at that age actually as adults. It's a weird thing.
Yes. And we often, like us guys, I know me, I made my young George my personal whipping boy. I was the prosecutor. I was the executioner of this little kid. I blamed him for everything.
So what does recovery look like for you?
Being comfortable in my own skin, not hating myself, not blaming myself.
Do you feel like you've forgiven yourself, what you think you've done?
Oh, yeah. I've forgiven myself for prosecuting myself. Mm-hmm. That was a big thing.
Yeah, that's huge.
I've even forgiven that uncle,
Wow. How did that come about?
Well, being a Christian, I mean, you got to, Not that ideally you got to, but I mean, it's just something that just, if you're a Christian, you do want to live in peace and forgiveness, and you want to be forgiven. You got to forgive others, ideally.
Well, we are actually, I mean, we're commanded to forgive in the.
Yeah. But just saying you're commanded, I mean, a lot of people hear that and like, well, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I don't want to hear that,
Yeah.
But after a while, I mean, you feel it. It's time to let it go and, forgive.
Well, you said something in your video that I really liked. You said it really wasn't about him. It was about you. If you could forgive and move on, it was more about freedom for you than letting him off the hook.
Yeah. I mean, and like maybe 6 months after I started dealing with this, I really got, you start going through the stages of grief, whatever, the anger and blah, blah, blah. So I was upset. I was angry. I wanted to confront him. Mm-hmm. I heard where he lived and it was an hour away again. So I went there one day. Mm. It was a big building and I rang the buzzer and all of a sudden I could feel this rage. I never had rage. I mean, I never wanted to, draw any kind of attention. So I never had feelings and issues and things like that. So I'm sitting there waiting, buzzing this buzzer in the downstairs lobby, and and there's no answer. But I'm sitting there waiting. He could be sleeping. I don't know. So I'm ringing it and waiting. I'm feeling all this rage, and I was shaking. Mm-hmm. And thank God he wasn't home. He never answered the bell. I couldn't believe it. I would have strangled him with my two hands.
You were that angry at that.
Yeah. So I said, well, I'll never do this again. But now if he's dead now, but if I saw him, I wouldn't strangle him. I've forgiven him. Mm-hmm. So I've come that far from wanting to strangle him, not knowing, a subconscious thing, and I've forgiven him.
Wow.
When did you become a believer? Was this later in your life, or?
No, my father, after my stepmother left him and us, he went to a rehab. Mm. He went away for the cure, and he cleaned up. He actually did.
Really?
And he found God through AA.
Wow.
And then he started dragging me and my little brother to church with him. And, of course, I'm like, what is all this? I'm not into this. I was, 11, 12 years old there. And as we're sitting in church at the end of the services and stuff, we would be approached by these, one or another guy say, oh, your boy should come out Wednesday nights to, for Royal Rangers, for all the young guys in church and the kids and, I'm not coming back here on a Wednesday night. Get out. And I'm not that I trusted anybody anyway. I mean, I didn't trust anybody. Why would I be going with this guy or the other one coming around? Why do they want me or my brother? I didn't trust anybody. And I guess my father made us, but I ended up, that was the best time of my childhood. Was part of that Royal Ranger group. And I got saved at one of their powwows.
Really?
12 years old. I mean, I was, grasping at anything to save me. I had a lot of, nasty stuff in my head, all the things I was doing and going through. I mean, I was reaching out for anything. So, I was like a drowning man trying to reach for a life. So yeah, I mean, Jesus, he's going to save me. Okay, I accepted Jesus into my heart. I'm saved. But that didn't stop everything. It didn't stop much. But at least I had that hope, and it saved me in a lot of ways.
That's amazing. That's, I realized when I was younger and I was reaching, I didn't have any guidance. I didn't have anyone saying, hey, come over here and try this. I never felt like I would be invited. Mainly like you, I didn't want to be noticed, but I also didn't think I was good enough to be a Christian. I thought you had to be a good person.
I'm sure there was some of that there, because I mean, I was, the shame again. I mean, I was the lowest of the low. No one was worse than me. All the stuff that I was doing, I felt like I was such a freak as a kid.
But you still felt accepted there.
Yeah, because I was faking it.
Oh.
Uh-huh.
But did I have a great time? Did I love it? Yeah. I mean, that's like the one bright spot in my childhood.
So you were faking it, but you still became a believer.
Yeah. But I was faking being the normal kid, that I can go and, and kind of act normal around people. But it was an act. It was a mask.
Yeah.
Because if they really knew,
Oh my goodness! If anybody, especially in a church, I was surprised that the lightning was shooting through the roof of me anyway.
So was it after you found these groups and that you finally kind of reconciled of
being a survivor
and being a Christian? Because it feels like a lot of times people come to faith either after or they walk away because it happened when they were a Christian.
Well, I always considered myself a Christian, and we went to church, but I stopped going to church when I was 16. I got a job. So that was, I enjoyed the church. I did, but there was so much going through my head. Yeah, I knew God was there for me, and I could pray and stuff. I guess I felt that, I don't know, I just pulled away. But I was still a Christian. Mm-hmm. But I was still, locked into all the craziness in my brain, these childhood coping mechanisms that were cobbled together, and I was still acting out. When I wasn't, I had this, bad abusive stuff in my head. When I was, young, I was going through all this. I mean, I had this intense jealousy and envy of other boys. Mm-hmm. And then because I didn't fit in, I was just an outsider looking in. And, I hated them, but I was envious of them. I was jealous of them. And here comes, the sexual abuse and then puberty and that all gets wrapped. Now I have a same-sex attraction, but it's not about loving, honoring, or cherishing. It's abusive. It's about power and control.
So how does that play into your life? How do you so I'm a recovery coach and I work with women coming out of drugs and alcohol, and recovery is ongoing process. Is it like that for you, or was there a time when?
Oh yeah. I mean, originally when I first hit the wall in 99 with this, I realized that, my big thing was power and control. That was my acting out. That was, that was my pacifier to get back some of that power and control. And it never worked. It never felt great. The second it was over, I felt like I was punched in the gut. I hated myself. It just added to the shame and guilt on top of all the other stuff,
So how has that changed for you now?
Well, I learned that was not working. It was like, the definition of insanity. You keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting something different. But you keep I call it being locked in the abuse cycle. Mm-hmm. Only now it was me abusing myself. It wasn't somebody else. Mm-hmm. I was locked in that. I was, acting out. I mean, anytime I felt like a failure or intimidated by somebody else, I didn't fit in. I mean, that would just trigger the stuff. I mean, I would go for years without doing that. But something happened. I mean, I started a business, a restaurant, and, I failed. And that after years went back, fell back into that. And then, it took a couple of years to, get back out of it. But I had to learn my triggers. Yeah. And I didn't, for years, I didn't see it. I mean, I would be going to like a Home Depot or something. And here I see, all these other guys with all these big, expensive trucks, obviously doing so well in business. And here I am with, my little junky vehicles. And, I mean, and it just triggered that, that inferiority and what I call masculinity issues, that I had. That it just and it would just start up all those things, and I needed my pacifier, and and once I figured that out, I was able to pull all that apart. Like, oh, okay, this is why this was happening.
So now that you're aware of it, what happens when you do get triggered? Because I know awareness is a huge part of it, but triggers still happen. Triggers don't exactly go away.
Yeah. I had to see that I was successful. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see the forest for the trees. I mean, I dropped out of high school and stuff, but I have a huge house that I built. I have multiple rental homes. I have cars. I have boats. I drive a junky car because I'm so cheap. I'm so cheap. I have a 32-year-old van, work van. Now I have a newer pickup truck too. My wife said, you got to get something. But I would be here. I'm driving these old vehicles, and I would be triggered because all these other people are driving, nice vehicles and stuff. I had to realize, I said, whoa, wait a minute. I had to give myself credit for surviving the abuse and coming as far as I did. I mean, I came, I used to see guys, and I would give them these airs of perfection. And I was constantly measuring my broken self against these other guys.
Yeah.
And I was taking account all my failures and shame and everything else against me, but with these, and then measuring against these other guys. So that would always, start that up again, and that would be my trigger. But then once I realized, hey, first of all, I survived. I'm thriving. I look what all I accomplished. I had to count all my blessings. I got many, many blessings.
Yeah.
Stuff I don't deserve. That's for sure. And knowing that broke that spell of measuring. And that was huge.
Yeah. That's what we see in the recovery world too, is coming from gratitude. And when I coach people that haven't come from abuse or haven't come from drugs and alcohol, they don't even understand how that would make a difference. And that you see people that are recovering and they're working on their recovery and self-growth, and they realize how important gratitude is. And I think that is one of the gifts of it, is that we recognize
how far we've come.
Yeah.
When I first realized this, again, this is not stuff that I thought of. This is all stuff I read from other guys, that this was their aha moments that they were writing about. I'm like, whoa, that makes sense. That's me. And this one guy said, oh, somebody gave him a Teddy Roosevelt quote on a plaque. Comparison is the thief of joy.
I love that.
That's great. So what I did, I made my own little collage of pictures of my family, my wife and kids, my boats, my houses and stuff, all on that with that. And so I had that above my computer in my office, and then at home in my master bathroom. So every morning I would see that. I'm like, son of a gun, look at that, blessed.
Yeah.
And something as simple as that, but that's where it came from. It was from somebody else writing about it on one of the forums.
That I think is one of the wonderful things about that forum, is you learn so much from other survivors at all different levels. There are some that are brand new survivors, and then some like us that have been through for years, but you get that recognition. You see something that you recognize in yourself, and you're able to learn, oh my gosh, I get that. They get that. I'm not the only one that does this. And it's so profound, because I think for most of us, we're our own worst critics, most of the time. And I think especially for survivors, because we're taught that we don't matter, that we're just an object, that, we don't belong. And often we're taught it's our fault. So to turn off that self-critic voice that tells us we don't belong, that, we never can measure up, that is an amazing gift to be able to turn that off. And to, like Larry was saying, gratitude is one of the most important gifts we can give ourselves, is just being grateful for what we've been through as far as where we've come.
And, the power of our story. And so, like you said, you've learned so much from everybody else, but you sat down in your car and you told your story.
Yeah.
And somebody else is going to hear that, and they're going to be how you were. They're going to go, oh my gosh. And I think that's what's so important. And what I have seen is people that are like, hey, it happened, it's done, I'm never talking about it, and they live in this, like you were were saying, it's in this hiding because they can't share it. They can't get freedom from it. And what feels like self-protectiveness, I always say it's sinful self-protectiveness, because you're really not protecting yourself. And when you're willing to be a little vulnerable, of course you want to go to people that are going to be good to listen to you or believe you, you know, but telling your story seems to really impact how we are able to start to heal.
Yeah. You know, you were saying how these other people, they don't want to face it. The walls that we build as kids, they become our prisons.
Yeah.
And once I broke free of that, you know, that was so great. Yeah.
So how's your relationship with the rest of your family, your brothers and
Oh, good. Yeah, good.
Are they aware of what you've gone through, or are they?
Yeah. After 1999, and I started dealing with the issues, I told them, I went back to my old best friend. I told him, listen, you know, because he told me about this at 12, you know, what happened with my uncle trying to attack him, you know, and I couldn't say anything. I commiserated with him, but I couldn't say anything more because I had so much I couldn't talk about, you know, I couldn't.
Your secret.
Well, yeah. I told him, I said, listen, you know, I have to, you know, tell you, you know, what happened with me. And this is why I'm so sorry. I couldn't say anything then. Wow. You know, he understood and forgave me. You know, he didn't blame me at all, you know, but he understood. Wow. This old friend I had to, you know, get a hold of and, you know, apologize to him. You know, what happened with him should have never have happened. Yeah. You know, and I felt guilty because once I started dealing with my own abuse issues, I started getting hypersensitive to, did I abuse him? Mm-hmm. You know, in my mind, it was a one-way thing. You know, we weren't friends. We were friends, but we weren't friends. He was like an oddball that nobody was really friends with. He didn't really have friends. Mm-hmm. He was convenient for me. That was it. Mm-hmm. You know, I had my real friends, and then, you know, when I was done with them, I would call him up, or we would walk home from school together. You know, that was it. I felt very guilty about that. So, you know, I wrote my story, and I saw him outside his house. He was avoiding me at this point. You know, he weren't doing anything. I was driving past. I pulled over and I handed him the piece of paper. I said, listen, read this. Don't show it to anybody.
Really?
Wow.
And then we ran into each other, and he says, oh, I'm so sorry. You know, you didn't, you know, I was a willing participant, you know, and then he told me what was going on in his house. He says, that was the only love I felt. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, it was terrible. You know, I felt bad because there's nothing about love.
Mm.
Yeah. So you've made amends. You've had, you know, it sounds like you've really gone through, when we talk about the process of grief, you know, stages of grief, it looks like you've gone through stages of recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. After I told the family, my other uncle says, oh, your cousin wants to speak to you.
Oh no.
The abuser's daughter, who's a little older than me. She wants to hear it from you. So I haven't spoken to this woman now in 20 something years. So I called her up. You know, it freaked me out because my other uncle told me that this abuser was babysitting his daughter's kid.
Oh no. Oh no.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, that ain't cool. So that's what triggered me to tell the family. You know, I said, this can't be, you know.
Yeah.
So she wanted to hear it from me. So I told her. I said, didn't you find it weird that, you know, I just stopped, I cut everybody out in your family at 12? Mm-hmm. She says, we just thought you were an a-hole. No, it was a little more than that.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah. But she believed me. She said, you know, I'm never going to talk to my father again.
Oh.
Well, you know.
Well, the best if she didn't let him babysit.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. It is what it is, you know. But Now her brother, my other uncle, told my cousin. He said that he's an effing liar after everything we did for him.
Oh.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm like, oh my goodness. But you know, if I was a betting man, I would bet that his father abused him too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
because there was a lot of nights I wasn't there.
Yeah.
When his father came home drunk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, So
it always amazes me when people say that, because like, who would want to come clean with a story like this if it wasn't true? I mean, it'd be better to say, like, I was dating a supermodel than your dad did this to me,
Not the typical thing you say to get attention.
Right.
It just isn't, especially for men. They're not as, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Well, and this is what my uncle said to him. He said, why would he say that? Why would he lie?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Well, I'm glad your one uncle at least supports you.
Yeah. I think you're really brave that you were able to, look at it, listen to it, and then look at, just like you said, I looked at all sides. I was like, was I the abuser? Was it, and I think that says a lot about your character, that, and that you were willing to go to the people you needed to and apologize. And it's not anything you would ever wish on anybody.
No. And in fact, I called up the county prosecutor's office to report the abuse. I knew that the statute of limitations was long past, but I figured if he's babysitting, he's living in an apartment building. I mean, I don't know what he's up to. Right. Maybe if he gets caught, it would be on record that, hey, he's done this before. It's not, it's the first time and it was a mistake or an accident, some kind of miscommunication. No, he's done this before. Yeah. So I wanted that. So I called up the office and they're like, oh, no, we don't take any information over the phone. You'll have to come in. I'm like, oh boy, I don't drive an hour, one, and then two, have to go spill my guts to some detective over there.
Right.
So I said, well, I'll do it. This means more to me than my inconvenience and, embarrassment. So I drove there. It's a huge building. So I asked, where's this office? It's the sex crimes unit. That's where I have to go. Oh. So I'm walking in. I find the office, and I walk in. There's there's like the typical desk sergeant and a big tall desk. He's standing behind. So I walk up to him. He goes, he's talking to somebody on the phone. He hangs up. He goes, are you here to register? I'm like, what? And I'm like trying to grasp what he said, and then he goes, no, I'm sorry, what are you here for? I'm like, I'm here to see Detective so and so. Oh, okay.
Oh my God.
And then it dawned, I'm a little slow, and then it dawned, I'm like, oh my goodness, he thought I'm here to register as a sex offender.
Well, that's probably the majority of the people that just drop in.
Yeah, that's what it is. But in the moment, I'm like, So I ended up meeting with this detective. I told him everything, and he says, well, all right, well, it's beyond the statute of limitations, but we'll obviously keep this in the file, and we're going to go and visit him. We'll talk to him, let him know that this happened, and we're just going to introduce ourselves, type thing.
Really?
Wow. Whether they actually did that, I don't know.
Well, I would,
because I called back like a month later to kind of find out what's happening, and he didn't really want to discuss anything with me. Oh. The detective, but I think they did make contact. I kind of heard that, I let the family know. I went to the county prosecutor's office and made a record of it.
Wow.
Good for you.
Amazing.
I can't tell you.
I was scared walking in and nervous, but let me tell you, I felt really good about myself walking out of there. That I stood up for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and for any other new victims. I mean, I think people forget about that. They're like, it's over, it's done with. But most of those people don't stop. Yeah.
Well, that's it. I felt bad. Maybe if I said something when it first happened, these other three boys wouldn't win. But I mean, I can't hold myself accountable for not talking at 8 years old.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
But even his daughter said to me, I wish you would have said something then. I said, how was I going to say? I didn't have a voice. I couldn't articulate. I didn't have the words for what was happening to me.
Yeah, people don't understand. It's also not our responsibility because we're the ones that are just trying to protect ourselves. And like you were talking about, you were put in this position where you felt like you had to protect him from your father, who probably would have killed him.
I wasn't worried about protecting him for his skin. I was worried about us losing a father, going to jail, and then where would we be?
Yeah.
We had nobody beyond him.
Right, because you'd already experienced that loss of mom.
no one realizes all the burdens that are put on the victim.
Right. And most people aren't believed, especially in the beginning. So,
especially when they're young.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing story, Gino. Yeah. And I'm so thankful that you found that post that changed your life. You know, that it's like it was meant to be.
Yeah. Well, and I just think of the other lives that you'll touch now that you've told your story, and even here, that, it's been so interesting for Kevin and I because every story is so different. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you heard Dan's story, but he ended up killing his dad. We had no idea when we, invited him on the podcast, and and it's like,
it was a bit of a shock.
Yeah. It's like, you cannot predict what abuse does to people. Some people act out, some people turn inward, some people, aren't resilient and they end up maybe,
in jail or dead.
Yeah.
If I wasn't saved as a kid, I would have been in jail or dead.
Yeah. I'm pretty amazed that you were able to get your life turned around considering all the things that were against you at that time, your family, the whole family, and the fact that, you had really nowhere to turn in so many ways.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
It is.
What would you say to someone if they're just figuring out that they're a survivor? They have never told anyone. What would your advice or would you want them to hear?
Keep going, work through it, because there is freedom. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. You can heal.
Yeah.
And be comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things for someone who's just trying to figure it out is you're not alone. There are others out there. Mm-hmm. They understand you. They get you. You don't have to be alone.
Yeah, definitely. So, and that's a lot easier now to find out that you're not alone. Just, being online, there's a lot of things that weren't there back in 99 when I was looking,
Yeah.
But I did find stuff. Thank God I did find stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was amazing.
Yeah.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, and especially for your son Gino and his story, and that there were those when he was young, there were those men that reached out to him, even though he wasn't looking, even though he wasn't comfortable, that they reached out to him and were able to bring him to a place of your grace, Lord. And that I pray for anyone else listening, they might not feel comfortable, they might not feel like they deserve, or they might not feel like they are looking for anything, that you would be there in their lives, that you would fill their lives with your grace, Lord, and that you would bless them and show them how much you love them and you want to heal them, Lord. And I just thank you for Gino's story, for those who are going to hear it and feel that they don't have to be alone, that they don't have to hide, that they don't have to put those walls up, that they can take those walls down and tell their stories and get the healing they deserve, Lord. And I just pray it's an inspiration to them to talk about it, to talk to someone about their story and to find that healing and to forgive themselves and also to forgive what has happened to them, so that they can start turning to gratitude and turning to the joy and the hope in their lives, Lord. And I just pray that you would continue to inspire Gino to tell his story to those that need to hear it. In your name I pray.
Father, I just thank you for the courage Gino has shown. And Lord, so often people don't realize that taking that next step is preventative measure for maybe the next person, Lord. So thank you for his courage in doing that. And thank you for the recovery process, Lord, that it's not just, oh, now I know, but then there's the growth and the learning and the self-forgiveness and all those layers and layers of things that go along with it, Lord. I thank you that he's brave enough to tell his story, and also that he's brave enough to
to be okay with who he is, Lord. And self-love is something that's very hard to come by, Lord. But when we find it and we find your healing grace, Lord, others benefit, our families benefit, everyone benefits when we're willing to be able to step into that growth and share our truth, Lord. And we know it's not easy. We know that it's hard and it's scary, but that it also is a process, Lord. And I just thank you that Gino is able to be on tonight and to talk about this. And I just pray for more blessings in his life, Lord, and that the people that come across him, that he gets to talk to, that they will feel your love and your grace. And I love that he said, keep going, keep working through it. There is a light. And I think that that's the biggest thing for me, is that first you got to face it, and then you've got to figure out how to let go and forgive and all of those things. And so I just thank you. Thank you so much for this story and how it will bless others. In your son's name.
Amen.
Amen.